I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer at Gold Derby, joined today by Emmy winner Alexis Bledel, who just received her fourth nomination in the category of Best Drama Guest Actress for her work as Emily Malik on the fourth season of Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale. First off, congratulations on your fourth nomination, Alexis. With it, you've been nominated for each and every season of Handmaid so far. What does it mean to you to be recognized by the TV Academy year after year for your work on this show and to be one of 10 acting nominations for the show this year and one of 21 nominations total?
It's so nice. I'm always so grateful to be nominated and to be included in just to get to work on the show in the first place. But yeah, to be singled out by the Television Academy means a lot because I've spent many years working in television and it's been a big part of my life. So it really means a lot, and it's just lovely to celebrate the show with the rest of the cast and all of our crew members who are nominated as well. This year is really fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really great to see a seasoned show still manage to get 20 plus nominations, which isn't a given when you're in your fourth season. And before we go on, I should mention that you're nominated alongside one of your co-stars, McKenna Grace, who plays Esther Keys on the show, but with whom, of course, you didn't get to work in the fourth season. But
I didn't, but
yeah.
she had a great message this season.
What
was it that she had, or her character, that she had to stay well so that she'd be ready when things get better? I love that
nice.
theme of her character. Yeah, when I watched the season, it was such a standout season to me that Bruce and the writers were able to produce, and given the fact that they were doing this amidst COVID is just, I mean, incredible to me. They did I feel like it was just one of the strongest seasons they've done.
Absolutely. It's such incredible to see what they were able to pull off in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, it's a great season on itself already, but the fact that you had huge spectacle scenes in some of those episodes, and the fact that they pulled it off so seamlessly is incredible.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah, and now that we are 4 seasons into the show, would you say that you're at a point where you know your character Emily in and out, or are you in a continuous process of discovering her by nature of her constantly changing environment and her constantly changing situations? I've had varying answers from your co-stars to this question.
It's definitely an ongoing process, although as the years go on, it's easier to jump in and out of the character. You're more familiar with the landscape of her journey, I guess. But I do work with my coach Lisa Robertson on all these big shifts that the writers are so generous to set me up with. They always do send her in a new direction that causes her to completely change every single season. So it's perfect because there's always a new challenge and a new thing to portray. It's not like it really doesn't feel like the same character year after year after year, but there are those things that carry over, from the beginning. So I try to remember all those things and recall the way that all felt before starting. So it's just like layer upon layer added on.
Yeah, and speaking of her constantly changing environments, we had 2 seasons of Emily in Gilead, and now we've had 2 seasons of her essentially in Canada. And what this show does so well is depict the wide range of experiences refugees from Gilead have once they've escaped Gilead. In the 3rd season, we saw that reintegrating into a free society is an incredibly difficult task for everyone, including Emily. She gets to reunite with her wife Sylvia and their son Oliver, but there's still so much trauma for her to unpack. So where would you say she is in the timeline of her recovery, for the lack of a better description, at the outset of the 4th season?
At the outset of season 4, she's on a good path. I think she has the support of her family and of Moira, who's really her touchstone, since she got back, and she's even found the purpose of finding homes for the children who were rescued from Gilead. So she's able to throw herself into that work because it's really what she knows, and she can feel useful and productive and all those good things. So she's doing really well, and then she's triggered pretty dramatically, I'd say twice throughout, and in the course of the season, and then she ends up in a very, very different place.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll definitely get into those to those episodes in just a second. And you already mentioned the fact that Emily and Moira spend so much time together. I mean, the first time we see Emily in the fourth season is with Moira in the second episode, Nightshade. They are both helping to rehouse children from Gilead who don't have relatives in Canada. And both of them express frustration over how June didn't consider that the fact that a lot of these children have a hard time untethering themselves from Gilead. But at the same time, Moira sort of says that her survivor's guilt almost makes her feel indebted to June. Would you say that Emily feels similarly indebted to June?
Yeah, definitely. June got her out of Gilead, so I don't know if Emily would have even survived much longer in Gilead if June hadn't found a way out for her. And so I think she's dying to see June, and to be reunited with her really brings everything back up. I think it's probably surprising to Emily how much it brings back for her, and then she has to grapple with all of that while trying to be a friend and trying to be supportive, in the ways that she's learned to be. She's got all her own stuff that's clouding her mind and her functioning, and then I think she and June end up just triggering each other, and they kind of add fuel to the fire for one another. In a
Absolutely.
crazy way.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating exploration, and we'll get into some of the dynamics between June and Emily in just a bit. When I interviewed Samira Wiley, she talked about how underrated the friendship between Moira and Emily really is, because both of them, they were not only handmaids in Gilead, they were queer handmaids in Gilead, which of course adds a whole new layer of trauma onto their experience.
Yeah.
How does this experience of them, or of Emily having been a queer handmaid in Gilead, who was also mutilated, how does that influence her ability to connect romantically again in post-Gilead life, especially with her wife, whom we unfortunately don't get to see in the fourth season? But how does that influence her?
Well, it's very layered, and yeah, the friendship between Emily and Moira is one that I think sort of could there is so much there that could be sort of expanded, or and I'm glad we got the scenes we got this season, but as Samara said, there is so much there, and yeah, I think what it adds, I think, for Emily is like she already had the sort of challenges in her workplace. In the flashback, you get to see what she was facing there, just the injustice of having to sort of depict her family life differently than a straight person in that job would have to, and go about things in such a fearful and careful way, not able to just be who she was and be proud of her family at that time. That oppression, I think, that she carried into Gilead from the outset, was already alive in her, and then she already having to fight against that, and then having to fight against the oppression of Gilead, and being raped and then being mutilated. It's just layer upon layer of hardship, and so I think you could probably say there are more layers to their experiences, to these two characters' experiences, that are very sort of loaded emotionally. And so when they do connect outside of Gilead, in Canada, they are able to kind of unpack some of that. And they're also, really different women who've had, pretty different experiences as queer women, but they do have, some experiences in common that are pretty significant to, you know, who they are at their core. And I think that creates a really deep connection for them in friendship. And they're able to do so much. I love that they just get to work on, you know, helping, you know, families, and they become really proactive once they're kind of a team. They just seem really positive and motivated, and then when June comes into that, you know, it's almost like a grenade is thrown into what's sort of in place, and everything gets shaken up, and it's great for the story to have that impact, because it just changes everything.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue to the 8th episode, titled Testimony, which was entered as your Emmy episode submission. This is obviously a very crucial episode for Emily, since she re-encounters Irene, a former aunt, who informed the eyes of Emily's relationship with a Martha, which caused that Martha to be hanged, as we saw, and Emily to be mutilated, as we've talked about. Just talk me through what is going through Emily's head when she re-encounters Irene, and when she's sort of forced by June, or pushed by June, to confront Irene, who begs Emily for her forgiveness.
Well, when she sees Aunt Irene very unexpectedly, you know, she thinks she's there for therapy, and then to see her, it just is a complete shock to her system. I'd say she goes into shock, and is completely triggered back to a place where she felt so vulnerable and fearful, and just it was the most damaging thing that happened to her there, I would say, because it's really when you know, she had to kind of face the consequences of what Gilead had in place, you know, against what she was doing, and what she was doing, I think, was really like a survival mechanism already, and then to be sort of to face the music for that is just really like, I don't know, it sends her to such a dark place. And then when Aunt Irene is begging her for forgiveness, I think it's such a flood of like mixed emotions, heavy emotions. And Emily has a scientific mind. She's really used to kind of methodically figuring out problems and looking at things from different angles in a very organized way. So when she has a flood of emotion, it's something that I think really challenges her, because she can't sort it right away, and she can't find, you know, a solution to that quickly or easily at all. So I think she's completely thrown off and just bitter and angry, and she definitely doesn't forgive in that moment. She can't get there at all. So what has the opportunity to express, I think, is something that I'm sure a lot of people who are in the process of working to heal from trauma experience, which is just that anger and that venting of true emotion, that, you know, that getting to say what you need to say to somebody's face, and kind of saying that it wasn't okay, and that it wasn't, you know, obviously it wasn't a healthy thing for Emily, and she gets to say that directly to Aunt Irene.
Absolutely. It's again, it's such a crucial episode for her, and I'm so glad the show explored that. And after Moira convinces Emily to actually go speak to Irene privately, we see Emily driving up to her house just to find out that Irene has committed suicide by hanging herself, which is in a way poetic. But could you elaborate on what you and Elizabeth Moss, who of course directed the episode, were going for in this scene, which has no dialogue and which completely relies on your face?
Well, I remember that Elizabeth said she wanted it to be still, so that we didn't want to know exactly which way Emily was leaning until later in the episode. So it was meant to be a bit tough to read, but I think as we were shooting it, I just let it kind of the visual of the hanging aunt there, just processing that as Emily driving up and not trying to do too much, was what it ended up being. It was it's still a shock, I think, to Emily. It's not what she was expecting, but it, yeah, in a way it sort of answers her problem. The problem begins to be solved, in her mind. The pieces start to get reorganized for her, because seeing that, she knows there won't be more from her, but at the same time, it's who knows if that's the way she, it's probably not the way she expected or wanted it to necessarily play out.
And as you already alluded to, at the end of the episode, Emily then admits that Irene being dead makes her feel good. She is relieved. And she even says, I hope I had something to do with it. Do you think June actually helps her, or helps Emily channel and unload her unprocessed rage? Or would you say that she is, in a way, reversing some of Emily's recovery / progress, if you will?
Definitely both. I think Emily has one thing in mind that she's trying to do. She actually has the most amazing wife and home life, that she's been really blessed to be able to go back to, and so she's really trying her best to make that to have a way forward with them, and so at the same time, Emily never would have chosen to confront Irene in that way, but she was forced by June to say her piece, and so in some ways, you could say that's a shortcut to resolving that Emily may have never gotten to have. It's probably not a path she would have chosen for herself, and so maybe that would have been stuck in there for a long time for her. So
yeah, absolutely. And that leads us right to the finale, in which June, Emily, and some of the other former handmaids reenact sort of this participation / salvaging and beat Fred to death. And it's really June and Emily who orchestrate it and sort of plan it in advance. We see that interaction between the two at the dinner table.
right.
And we even, yeah, and we even see a little smile on Emily's face when she goes in on Fred. I almost felt like we were seeing shades of Gilead Emily in this episode. So is that something you were going for in this episode or in these scenes? And what do you think this means for Emily going forward?
Oh, I have no idea where they're going to take her next. I never know, because it's always like a wonderful curveball. But yes, it was sort of planned by both of them, and they did kind of egg each other on, just by nature of their sort of innate trauma. They just happened to, and their connection, that they forged early on in Gilead. Everything is just brought back to the surface when they're reunited. So this just kind of unfolds. This is what they bring out in each other, is that revenge, sort of that drive for revenge. And I'm forgetting now what was the part of the question that leads us to the scene with Joe.
Yeah, if in the episode in general you were like channeling some of Gilead Emily,
right.
Off Glenn and of Stephen and of Roy and of Joseph. If there was any, I felt like we were seeing shades of her in that episode. Is that something you were like consciously going for, or is that something that just came naturally?
I'm sure that's something that Bruce intended to bring back up, because that's all still Emily. That's all still part of her experience that she's essentially squashed down to try to find a better path forward. So when she's triggered, that all just comes back up, and it is that previous Emily, that and all that rage that is probably largely unprocessed. It's not, we haven't seen Emily going to find healthy ways to get her anger out. She's really chosen a more kind of helpful and peaceful way forward. And who knows, this is just kind of how it comes out, because it is just still there.
Absolutely. And I think that is such a perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Alexis, for joining us today and talking about your character. She is such a fascinating part of the show. And to our viewers, make sure to check out the 4th season of The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu if you haven't already. And before you leave, make sure to click subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.